California has so much to offer, from its many famous cities and landmarks to its iconic sunny beaches. There's lots to see when traveling in California, whether it's from the road, the sea, or by rail. Amtrak's Pacific Surfliner is known for its stunning views of the California coastline. It is one of Amtrak's most well-known passenger lines connecting some of Southern California's most important cities. I will be talking about this route yet again and why you should come to TSW2. Now, you may be asking, why am I remaking this video yet again? Simple answer is that the old video was just bad. It was just bad. It was kind of expected since it was my first ever route suggestion video, but it had so much incorrect information and I missed out on so many things that I should have talked about in that video. But from then to now, I can definitely say I've significantly improved in how I research for routes. So this is going to have a lot more accurate information. This is also going to be my longest route suggestion video yet. So I recommend you guys go grab some snacks and get comfy, because this is going to be a long one. Before we get into the video, I just need to say that I do not own any footage within this video. All rights go to their respective owners, and all footage within this video will be linked in the description. With that all out of the way, let's get right into what the Pacific Surfliner is all about. Amtrak's Pacific Surfliner is an intercity passenger train that travels between San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Luis Obispo. The line is operated by the Los Angeles, San Diego, San Luis Obispo Rail Corridor Agency in partnership with Amtrak and Caltrans. The total line length is 350 miles and stops at a total of 29 stations along the entire network. It is Amtrak's third busiest service behind the Northeast Regional and the Acela Express. It is also the busiest rail corridor in Southern California. The Surfliner is well known for its gorgeous views of California's sunny beaches. However, it also goes through LA's massive commercial district and also goes through lots of mountainous terrain. The line has a wide diversity in scenery and will be a major highlight of the route. The corridor sees various different operators such as Amtrak, Metrolink, Coaster, Union Pacific, and BNSF. Trains will be coming out of the famous Los Angeles Union Passenger Terminal serving various Amtrak trains, Metrolink, and the LA Metro. The Pacific Surfliner is broken up into two lines. One goes southbound from Los Angeles to San Diego, and one goes northbound from Los Angeles to San Luis Obispo. I will be talking about each line individually as both these routes have a lot of differences. Starting with the more well-known route, the Los Angeles-San Diego Rail Corridor, or LOSAN for short, is a passenger line traveling between Los Angeles Union Station and San Diego Santa Fe Depot. There are a total of 22 stations along the entirety of the route. Amtrak stops at only 10 of these stops. The total route length is approximately 128 miles and has a top speed of 90 miles an hour. The route is well known for its amazing views of the Pacific coast from San Clemente to Solana Beach. This section of the line is a famous area for rail fanning and is a great place to take photos of the coastline. San Clemente and Del Mar are also very famous beaches that many tourists visit every day. It's also well known for its unique and beautifully built stations. Nearly every station on the route has something interesting and unique about them, giving players lots to look at while they are loading passengers. Trains will also pass through mountainous terrain in Sorrento Valley on the Miramar Hill. Although this is the slowest portion of the route, it gives off lovely views of the surrounding terrain. Trains travel up a steep 2% gradient for approximately 3 miles. Once it reaches the summit, trains resume back down to higher speeds on their downwards approach to San Diego. Although this may not be a challenge for passenger trains, it will be a major challenge for many freight trains that cross over the Miramar Hill. The route also travels inland for a portion of the route. Trains will be traveling from LA to San Juan Capistrano, traversing through LA's massive commercial district, along with traveling through many residential areas in smaller cities. Trains also stop by the famous Angels Stadium, home to the MLB's Anaheim Angels. Many commuters take the train to Anaheim for events occurring at the stadium. From the bustling cities of Los Angeles, to the mountainous terrain in Sorrento Valley, to the gorgeous California coastlines, this route has scenery that would appeal to almost any player. The Los Angeles corridor is the busier of the two lines, seeing many different operators that use at least part of the line. The line sees Amtrak, Metrolink, Coaster, and BNSF. Let's go into more detail on each operator that runs on the corridor. Starting with Amtrak, the main rolling stock would come with the Siemens SC44 Charger and Surfliner bi-level coaches and cab cars. The Charger is a diesel-electric passenger locomotive built by Siemens Mobility in 2016. It is capable of speeds of 125 miles an hour and has a max power output of 4,400 horsepower. This was the replacement of Amtrak's F59 PHIs. Chargers took over the Surfliner in 2018, leading to Amtrak's F59s being shipped to Metra. In terms of sounds, the Charger uses a Cummins QSK95 prime mover. In terms of the horn and bell, it uses a standard raised letter K5LA and an E-bell. The Surfliner cab cars were built by Alstom for intercity passenger use in California. They were built between 1998 and 2002. They were delivered to the Surfliner when it first began operation in 2000. Its design was inspired by the famous Superliner coaches used for long-distance Amtrak trains. In terms of sounds, it uses a standard K5LA. The Surfliner usually consists of a business coach, a coach/cafe coach, two standard coaches, a superliner or observation coach, and finally, a cab car. The Surfliner will be running along the entirety of the route, making limited stops, only stopping at 10 of the 22 stations along the entire corridor. Modern day, Amtrak is running 10 round trips from LA to San Diego. This means we would have approximately 20 mainline Amtrak services. Occasionally, 1 to 2 additional trains get added for special events in San Diego, such as Comic-Con, the San Diego County Fair, and events at the Del Mar racetrack. Some Surfliner trains run up to 10 to 12 coaches for extra capacity for these events. Before the pandemic, Amtrak was running 13 round trips. However, I would much prefer this route being set in modern day for a reason I'll get to later on in this video. Since Amtrak only stops at about half of the stations along the route, this is where Metrolink and Coaster step in. Metrolink and Coaster are commuter trains that serve Los Angeles and San Diego respectively. Coaster is operated by the North County Transportation District. It travels between San Diego Santa Fe Depot and Oceanside Transit Center. This section of the line is approximately 41 miles and calls at a total of 8 stations. Coaster trains stop at all stations along this part of the route. Modern day, Coaster runs 15 daily round trips between Oceanside and San Diego. On Fridays, Coaster runs 1 additional train, adding up to about 32 total mainline services. The rolling stock used on Coaster is the SC44 Charger and the Bombardier bi-level coaches and cab car. Coaster received 5 Chargers in 2018 to replace their EMD F40PHM-2Cs. Coaster will receive 2 more Chargers in late 2022 to replace their F59 PHIs, and in 2023, Coaster will receive 2 more, allowing for increased train traffic. Although the Coaster SC44 is remotely the same as the Amtrak one, it has one physical difference. Since the Surfliner uses coaches larger than the maximum height of the loco itself, it has a slope on the back of it to increase aerodynamics. Coaster, however, uses Bombardier passenger coaches. The end of the coaches are about the same height as the SC44, meaning it doesn't need the sloped rear. This means DTG can't fully reuse the Charger model without modification. Although this isn't a difficult change, it is something worth noting. Since Coaster is in a time of upgrading their fleet, there is a mix between the old and new livery on the passenger coaches and cab cars. However, this is not a simple reskin. Bombardier is overhauling all coaches to improve the overall quality of them. These improvements include upgraded door systems, LED light fixtures, seat cushion replacements, and the installation of charging outlets at all seats. Most likely, DTG will use the newer livery, but it would be more realistic if they include the older coaches and cab cars. In terms of sounds for the Bombardier cab car, it uses various types of horns based on their road number. 2301 uses a fouled K5LA. 2302 and 2303 uses standard K5LA. 2304 uses a K5CA. I swear to God, if DTG chooses 2304, I will throw something. And 2305 to 2310 use a raised letter K5LA. All cab cars use a steel belt except for 2309 and 2310, which recently obtained an E-bell. Moving on, Metrolink is a commuter rail operator serving the Los Angeles metropolitan area and various surrounding cities in Southern California. It is a vital connection to various other trains such as Coaster, Sprinter, Amtrak, and the LA Metro. Metrolink operates 7 different lines covering over 534 miles of track and has a total of 62 stations along the entire network. 3 of Metrolink's lines run on at least a portion of the Surfliner. Before we talk about these 3 lines, let's quickly talk about the rolling stock. Modern day, Metrolink uses the EMD F125 and the MP36PH-3C. Metrolink trains pull a mix of Hyundai Rotem and Bombardier bi-level coaches. Nicknamed the Spirit, the F125 is a 4-axle AC traction diesel-electric passenger locomotive built by EMD in 2015. It has a power output of 4,560 horsepower and is able to achieve a top speed of 125 miles an hour. It was the replacement for Metrolink's EMD F59PH and F59PHIs. It is the competitor to the SC44, meeting Tier 4 emission standards and contains similar specifications. In terms of traction motors, the F125 uses a Caterpillar C175-20. In terms of the horn, it uses a Nathan K2. Metrolink 926 and 929 also have a Nathan K3L as a backup horn on the roof. Just like most modern US locomotives, the F125 uses an E-bell. The MP36PH-3C on Metrolink is fairly similar to the ones used by Caltrain. The only major difference between the two is the horn used for them. The Caltrain MP36 uses a standard Nathan P2. Metrolink's MP36 also uses a P2, but is significantly different sounding. Besides this one difference, DTG would most likely be able to add this in without having to make too many changes. As mentioned before, Metrolink uses a mix of Hyundai Rotem and Bombardier bi-level coaches. However, Metrolink only uses the Hyundai Rotems for cab cars since they are more aerodynamic and are much more crash-worthy. Most likely, DTG would just add the Rotems, but it would also add more realism if DTG added the Bombardier coaches. The Rotem cab cars entered service for Metrolink in 2010. In terms of sounds, the cab car uses a Nathan K2 similar to the F125 and uses an E-bell. Let's now talk about where Metrolink runs on this line. The first Metrolink line that runs on the Los Angeles corridor is the Orange County line. This line travels between Los Angeles and Oceanside, which is approximately 87 miles and stops at a total of 15 stations. Metrolink trains will be calling at all stops between LA and Oceanside, with some trains skipping Commerce Station. Modern day, there are approximately 17 mainline services serving the Orange County line. Heading outbound, 5 trains terminate in Oceanside, 2 trains terminate at Laguna Niguel, and 1 terminates at Irvine. Heading inbound, there is 1 additional train that originates in Irvine. The second line that runs on this route is the Inland Empire line. This line travels between San Bernardino and Oceanside. This is the only Metrolink line in the network that does not go to Los Angeles. The full route length is 100 miles and stops at a total of 16 stations. The route travels along the Los Angeles corridor between Orange County and Oceanside. This section of the route is approximately 54 miles and calls at 8 stops. This line sees 14 mainline services modern day. Going outbound, 2 trains terminate at Oceanside, 4 trains terminate at Laguna Niguel, and 1 train terminates at Irvine. Heading inbound, 1 additional train originates at Laguna Niguel. The final line that runs on this route is the 91/Paris Valley line. This line travels between Los Angeles and Paris. It was originally named the 91 line since it races along State Route 91. The total route length is 83 miles and stops at a total of 12 stations. Unlike the Orange County line, all trains that serve this line skip Commerce Station. The line travels along the Los Angeles corridor between Los Angeles and Fullerton, which is approximately 26 miles. Trains will call at 4 stations. This line sees 10 mainline services. 4 trains head inbound towards LA and 6 head outbound. Adding up all of these Metrolink services will add up to about 41 mainline Metrolink services running along some portion of this route. Combining all passenger services from Amtrak, Metrolink, and Coaster adds up to a total of 91 passenger services. This excludes deadheads and depot runs. There are many depots along the route. Starting in LA, Amtrak owns a major yard just a couple miles outside of Union Station. This is where most Amtrak trains are stored at night, along with where they are brought in for maintenance. Services to and from the depot, along with some shunting, could definitely add more services for Amtrak trains. Metrolink trains also have their own dedicated maintenance facility just a few miles outside of LA. This would yet again add more services to Metrolink. Just outside of Oceanside, Stewart Mesa Yard is a maintenance facility for both Metrolink and Coaster trains. This would add even more additional services to Metrolink and Coaster as they will be driving between Oceanside and the depot. In San Diego, coaster trains also utilize tracks 25, 26, and 27 at the San Diego Trolley Yard to store trains during the midday and be used later on in the day. Coaster trains also have deadheads late at night heading towards San Diego. Adding these kinds of services into the timetable, I could see about 130 to 150 total services in terms of passenger trains. Now, what about freight? There's quite a bit of freight traffic that runs on this route, primarily BNSF. Most freight traffic can be found in the Los Angeles area between LA and Fullerton. BNSF operates a major intermodal facility right next to Commerce Station. They also have an intermodal yard just outside of LA. There's lots of freight traffic coming in and out of these yards, meaning this area will be busy. However, this is primarily between LA and Fullerton. Most freight trains branch off at Fullerton to head up to Barstow. This area would probably see about 40 to 60 mainline trains throughout a 24-hour period. The area does also see some foreign power such as Norfolk Southern. DTG could layer 1 to 2 mainline services using the ES44AC from Horseshoe Curve onto this route. From a practical sense, these services would not be playable since freight would travel such a short distance and stop in a place in Fullerton that would make no sense. Most playable freight services in this area would most likely be shunting in the yards, and smaller local trains serving the many facilities within the area. Local trains and shunters are usually performed by the EMD GP60, GP50, GP40, GP38, and genset switchers. Gensets are only used in Los Angeles, so it would be a great idea for DTG to add them to this route, as they aren't used anywhere else in the US. A new GP would also be nice to see, such as the GP60. I could see about 15 to 30 shunting and local services within this area of the route. As you move towards San Diego, there is a lot less mainline freight traffic. Most freight trains are usually seen at night to prevent congestion and delays of other passenger trains. On some occasions, 1 to 2 freight trains can be seen during the day. This area could see about 2 to 5 mainline freight trains that would most likely be playable. BNSF does own a yard in San Diego that is primarily used for general freight and vehicle hauling. I could see about 10 to 15 services within this area. BNSF's primary mainline locos are the GEVOs, the EMD SD70 ACE, and the EMD SD70M. However, most freight traffic in this area is primarily GEVOs, making it the best option. San Diego also sees the Miramar Local. This is a local freight train that serves the Escondido subdivision and the Miramar branch line. It was originally operated by the Pacific Sun Railroad. However, in October 2020, the Pacific Sun Railroad's contract expired with BNSF, leading to BNSF taking over the Miramar Local. BNSF usually uses 2 to 3 Blue Bonnet GP60s for duties on the Miramar Local. This train would be seen late at night coming out of Stewart Mesa Yard serving the Escondido subdivision. It also runs down from Oceanside down to the Miramar Spur at the Miramar Hill in Sorrento Valley. I could see no more than 5 to 10 services done by this train. Adding up how many playable freight services I could see on this route, I could see about 25 to 40 playable freight services on this route. As you can see, there is a lot that can be done in terms of freight on this route. Although this would not be the busiest US route with freight on it, it would definitely bring a lot more variety and light to the route. So what makes the most sense in terms of what should come with the base route and what should be a DLC? Obviously Amtrak would come with the base route, but it begins to get difficult whether to include BNSF, Metrolink, or Coaster as a secondary operator on the route. DTG would probably be better off adding Coaster to the route since they would be able to reuse the Amtrak SC44 with minor modifications to make it accurate with its real-life counterpart. Metrolink would most likely be best as a DLC since it would require a new locomotive, new passenger coaches, and a new cab car. If Metrolink ever got its own route in the future, then DTG could just layer Metrolink onto this route. Same could be said about BNSF. But it could work as part of the base route since there would not be a lot of playable freight traffic on this route. The genset switchers may be a viable option for a DLC since they are only used in Los Angeles. Whatever DTG does, There's a lot they can do in terms of DLC and layers. Now let's talk about a timetable pack in an older time period. What would make the most sense? There are many different eras that could be added as a DLC or a future layer onto this route. Starting with what I think would make the most sense for a classic pack would be to go back to 2015. This was before Amtrak, Metrolink, and Coaster began to modernize their fleet. Starting with Amtrak, they used the EMD F59 PHI, one of my all-time favorite locomotives. Built in 1994, the F59 PHI is a 4-axle, 3,200 horsepower diesel-electric locomotive built between 1994 and 2001. It is capable of speeds of up to 110 miles an hour. Over 83 of these units were built for various different commuter operators. The F59 PHI served on the Pacific Surfliner for 18 years until they were replaced by the SC44 Charger. The F59s were then shipped to Metra for use on their roster. In terms of sounds, the F59 PHI has an EMD 12-710 G3C-EC prime mover. In terms of the horn and bell, the F59 uses a fouled K5LA and an E-bell. Something that was also commonly seen during this time was a single-level Surfliner set. This usually consisted of an F59 or P42 DC leading, pulling ampletes and horizon coaches. There would also be an NCPU F40PH at the rear. NCPU stands for Non-Controlled Power Unit. This means that the F40 is not powered and is used as a cab car. When Amtrak retired its F40s in the early 2000s, Amtrak kept 24 F40s and turned them into cab cars. Where it used to be an engine of an F40 was now an open space where passengers could put their luggage in. These are seen only on a couple other Amtrak corridor trains. It would also be cool if DTG included Amtrak 90208. This is a veterans unit on one of Amtrak's NCPU F40s. However, it recently got into an accident with a truck and has not returned to the mainline since. But back in 2016, it was definitely still being used. They were also occasionally used as cab cars on longer Surfliner trains. In terms of sounds, the F40 uses a standard K5LA and a steel bell. Moving on to Metrolink, they use the EMD F59 PHR, the F59 PHI, the MP36PH-3C, and the EMD F40PH. The F59 PHI on Metrolink is remotely the same as the Amtrak one. However, it uses a Nathan P2 similar to the one on Peninsula Corridor as its horn. They also use a steel bell instead of an E-bell. The F59 PHR was Metrolink's first family of locomotives to begin service for the operator back in 1992. This is the older version of the F59 PHI. It has a more boxy cab and had its design based on the EMD GP59. Around 2010, when Metrolink introduced the Road and passenger coaches, Metrolink rebuilt 7 of their 10 F59 PHs into PHRs. These rebuilds included an upgraded cooling system, an upgraded prime mover to comply with Tier 2 emission standards, and implemented an E-bell. Just like the F59 PHI, it uses the same horn and a fairly similar prime mover. When Metrolink's locomotives were replaced by the F125, Metrolink had kept a few of their F59 PHRs to be used as yard switchers in their main depot. This opens up some possibilities for a couple of switching services within the modern timetable. Metrolink also owned one F40PH known as Metrolink 800. It was formerly an Amtrak F40PH, but was given to Metrolink once it was retired from Amtrak. This wouldn't make a lot of sense to add since Metrolink only owned one F40, but it is definitely something worth noting. Metrolink also used the MP36 during this time period. As mentioned before, Metrolink introduced the Rotem passenger coaches in 2010. This leads to my second suggested time period, which is 2009. This was when Metrolink only used Bombardier bi-level coaches and used Bombardier bi-level cab cars. Metrolink trains also used a different livery at this time. Metrolink introduced a brand new green livery when they introduced the Rotem coaches and completely rebranded themselves. The F59s were given a new paint job so that they better suited the Rotem livery better. Before this, Metrolink used a white, purple, and yellow livery. This was one of the more well-known liveries of Metrolink. Just like the F59s, the Bombardier cab car uses a steel bell with two different variations of the Nathan P2. This is relatively similar to the Bombardier coaches on Peninsula Corridor. However, it has three major differences. The first difference is that the Metrolink cab car used traditional headlights while the Caltrain cab car uses LED headlights. The next major difference is the horn placement. Caltrain placed its horn underneath the train so that it is not visible. Metrolink, however, situated their horns on the top of the cab. The final major difference is that there is not a front window on the left-hand side of the cab. There is only a windshield for the actual driver. Moving back to 2015, Coaster was using the older livery. The locomotive fleet for Coaster in this time was the EMD F40PHM-2C and the EMD F59PHI. The F59PHI on Coaster is basically the same as the Amtrak version. They have the same prime mover, horn, and bell. Coaster also owned 5 F40PHM-2Cs. These are not the same as the F40PHMs that are seen on Metra. The F40s on Coaster used the traditional design. Similar to the F40PH-3C on NEC, the Coaster F40s have a Cummins HEP generator to supply electricity to the passenger coaches. In terms of sounds, the F40 uses an EMD 645E3 prime mover. For the horn and bell, it uses a standard K5LA and steel bell. In terms of freight, locos would be fairly similar to modern day. However, older versions of the GEVO and the ACE might be more common during this time period. This was also when the Miramar local was operated by the Pacific Sun Railroad. Instead of GP60s from BNSF, the Pacific Sun Railroad used EMD GP35s. Moving on, the next time period takes us back to the 1980s. During this time, the Surfliner was formerly known as the San Diegan. Although Amtrak obtained the San Diegan in the 70s, 1980 was when Amtrak had the most train traffic, having 7 total round trips between LA and San Diego. The service pattern was relatively similar to the Surfliner stopping patterns. However, it made additional stops at Santa Fe Springs, Orange County, Carlsbad Village, Encinitas, and Linda Vista, a station that no longer exists. The rolling stock around this time consisted of the original EMD F40PH Screamer. Amtrak was the first ever customer of the F40PH. They purchased over 78 of the standard F40s. Amtrak also owned 132 F40PHRs, primarily used for long-distance trains. The F40s will be pulling a baggage car, Amfleet, and ex-Metroliner cab cars. Although not exactly like the ex-Metroliner cab car from NEC New York, these two cab cars are nearly identical. With minor modifications, DTG could definitely implement this. In terms of freight, most freight work was done by Santa Fe and some Union Pacific trains. Santa Fe trains could be seen along the entirety of the route, while UP was primarily seen within Fullerton. Primarily, Santa Fe used the EMD SD40, the SD75, various GP variants, and various U models from General Electric. From a practical sense, I think this could happen. You would get 14 mainline service and possibly some depot runs. I could see about 20 to 30 services in a pack like this with Amtrak. Adding freight could possibly add 5 to 15 more services, definitely making this a possibility for a future DLC. Moving on to the final era, we head all the way back to the 1940s and 1950s, when Santa Fe operated the San Diegan. Santa Fe began operations of the San Diegan in 1938. In 1941, Santa Fe had 4 round trips between LA and San Diego. In the 40s, trains were pulled by the EMC E1A. In the late 40s, they were replaced by the Alco PA. Then in the 50s, Santa Fe used the EMD F3 and EMD F7. If I was to pick one that would make the most sense, I would go between the EMC E1A and the EMD F7. The F7 may be the more viable option since we have it on Clinchfield. However, it would require various minor changes to fit the Santa Fe version. In 1955, typical Santa Fe trains usually consisted of a baggage/mail car, another baggage car, 8 standard coaches, and a bar lounge car. A 5th round trip was added a couple months after the 2 additional round trips were added. This round trip was pulled by a steam train due to soldiers needing transportation to military bases in San Diego during World War II. The steam loco in question is the Baldwin 462. Consists usually consists of a full buffet car, a dining car, and 3 standard coaches. Just like the 80s, Santa Fe was performing freight on this line. The only locomotive I was able to find that did freight during this time period was the EMD FT model. From a practical sense, this pack would be very unlikely as this has even less services compared to the 80s. Looking at all these different time periods, I think the most logical classic time period would be before 2010. I think this would bring the most variety out of this route with the infamous F59 family and the well-loved F40. Before 2016 would also make sense as there was slightly more train traffic during this time, but I think 2010 would be more appealing just because of the Bombardier bi-level cab cars on Metrolink. However, I think it is absolutely best if DTG sets this route modern day. Although there is not as much traffic during this time period, there is one key reason why modern day is the absolute best time period to set this route in. If we look back at the TS1 version of the Pacific Surfliner, the route was set back in 2013. Between then and now, the line has gone through significant changes. In late 2016, SANDAG, or the San Diego Association of Government, ordered various track improvements on the Los Angeles corridor between Orange County and San Diego. They have received over $1 billion in funding from the US government to undergo these improvements. In the TS version, the line was double-tracked between Los Angeles and the outskirts of Orange County. The rest of the line to San Diego is single-track with occasional siding tracks to allow for additional train traffic. As demand for increased train traffic is a lot higher, the ultimate goal of this project is to double-track all of the corridor by 2050. Other improvements in this project include station improvements, curve easing, expansions of the San Diego Trolley Blue Line, speed increases, bridge replacements, and these next two pain me, quiet zones and grade separations. Most curve easing is seen on the Miramar Hill. This is the slowest portion of the route. Trains traveling up the steep 2% gradient travel at about 30 miles an hour. The current plans are to lessen the sharpness of curves along this section of the track so that trains are able to travel at higher speeds. Going downhill towards San Diego, various curves are being eased so that trains are able to average 70 to 79 miles an hour heading into San Diego. Trains will also be following the extended San Diego Trolley Blue Line. In 2021, the Blue Line was completely extended to connect with UC San Diego. It follows the Lausanne corridor halfway up the faster section of the Miramar Hill until disappearing into a tunnel heading towards UC San Diego. Carlsbad Poinsettia and Oceanside have also received upgrades. Carlsbad Poinsettia has raised platforms for easier boarding, removed pedestrian crossings, and added a steel fence between the tracks, allowing trains to pass through the station at full speed while another train is loading on the other track. Oceanside received a third platform for extra capacity at the station. Many bridges along the corridor that were very old and outdated have been replaced with more modern concrete bridges. Caltrains' ultimate goal is for trains to be able to achieve speeds of 110 to 125 miles an hour along the corridor with the end result of this massive project. Although this is far from happening, Caltrans hopes to allow for more consistent 90 miles an hour action along the entirety of the route. All of these improvements make the route significantly different from the TS version, making it feel a lot more fresh and new. Having what is currently part of the improvement project will make the route significantly stand out from the old version, along with making the route much more enjoyable. Let's now finally talk about the practicality of adding this route to the game. Although I think the route would be much better if DTG did the full route, it's most likely they will not do it. I have come up with 3 route shortages that I believe would make the most sense if DTG does not do the full route. Starting with what I think would be the best in terms of service count, we have LA to Oceanside. This would include the 83-mile stretch of track between LA and Oceanside in all 3 Metrolink lines. However, this eliminates Coaster from the route along with the bulk of the changes seen in the Lausanne Corridor Improvement Project. In total, there would be 61 mainline passenger services adding up all Amtrak and Metrolink services. The next best option that would be the best in terms of scenery would be San Juan Capistrano to San Diego. This section of the route is approximately 66 miles. This would include the entire part of the line that travels along the coastline. In terms of services, this would allow all passenger operators to run on this section of the line. Metrolink trains would be running between San Juan Capistrano and Oceanside. However, they would only be stopping at 3 stations. There would only be about 14 services that head to and from Oceanside, hurting its chances of it being a logo DLC for this route. However, if Metrolink ever got its own route in the future, DTG could most certainly layer Metrolink onto this section of the route. This would also include the full coaster line. In total, there would be about 66 passenger services combining all operators. The majority of them would be Amtrak and Coaster. The final option, and the option DTG may find as the best option, would be the entire coaster line from Oceanside to San Diego. As mentioned before, this stretch of the line is 41 miles. There would be a total of 52 mainline passenger services running along this section of the corridor. However, this completely eliminates Metrolink from the route since Metrolink trains do not go farther than Oceanside. Although this does hinder the amount of passenger services, we would still have a decent amount of train traffic along this part of the corridor. This may be the most practical and most viable option for DTG to do, but I think this route shines the most in its entirety. In terms of licensing, this is where the route runs into problems. Various operators own different sections of the route. From LA to Fullerton, the line is owned by BNSF. From Fullerton to Oceanside, tracks are owned by Metrolink. Finally, Oceanside to San Diego is owned by the North County Transportation District. All of these operators have licensing issues with DTG. Although DTG does have licenses for all these operators for the TS version, Metrolink and Coaster trains were unbranded, and BNSF trains were unbranded outside of North America. DTG wants to avoid unbranded liveries for TSW, hindering the chances of this route. However, if DTG ever does come to an agreement with all these operators, this would make for an amazing addition to the game. The TS version of this route is only a taste of what this route is truly all about. This route has many qualities and unique factors that makes it stand out from many US passenger lines in the United States. From its stunning and diverse scenery to its interesting and distinct gameplay, this would make for an amazing addition to TSW if it ever comes to the game in the near future. Let's now move on to the Northern Pacific Surfliner line. The Northern Pacific Surfliner line is a 188-mile passenger line traveling between Los Angeles Union Station and San Luis Obispo. The top speed of the line is 79 miles an hour. There are a total of 20 stations, with Amtrak stopping at 17 of the 20 stations along the line. Similar to the Los Angeles corridor, this line is heavily known for its breathtaking scenery of the coastline from Ventura to San Luis Obispo. Trains travel less than 100 feet from the coastline, making it a very picturesque route. Trains will wind along steep cliffs, many curves, and various viaducts. Trains will also be traveling through numerous commercial areas from LA to Van Nuys. The route also travels by 2 airports. Trains will be serving Burbank Bob Hope Airport and Van Nuys Airfield. Players will be seeing lots of plane traffic within this area, similar to Brighton Main Line. Leaving Van Nuys, trains will be traveling into the famous Simi Valley. This is one of the slower portions of the route. Although this is one of the slower portions of the route, it delivers lots of amazing views of the surrounding rocky terrain. Trains also pass through lots of farmland between Moore Park and Oxnard. This route definitely has the stronger scenery of the two and would definitely be the primary focus of this route, unlike LA to San Diego. Before we go any further, let's quickly talk about the rolling stock on this route. This route sees Amtrak, Metrolink, and Union Pacific. Amtrak uses the exact same rolling stock on this line. The line modern day sees 4 trains every day. 2 travel to San Luis Obispo and 2 travel to Goleta. This would add up to about 8 mainline services. As mentioned before, a DTG includes the Amtrak depot that would provide some more additional services for Amtrak trains. Some services can also be added in the Goleta area. When a train terminates at Goleta, trains pull out of the station and then reverse onto a siding that has a train wash and a storage track. This would give the Surfliner a few additional services. This route also adds another Amtrak train to this route. The train in question is the Coast Starlight. Amtrak's Coast Starlight is a long-distance passenger train that travels between Los Angeles Union Station and Seattle King Street Station. It will be serving as an express train for this route, only stopping at Los Angeles, Van Nuys, Simi Valley, Oxnard, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo. The rolling stock used for the Coast Starlight is primarily the General Electric P42DC. The GE-8-32BWH is also seen pulling the Coast Starlight from time to time. A typical Coast Starlight consist consists of 2 locomotives, a baggage coach, 3 sleepers, a Pacific Parlor coach, a dining coach, a sightseer lounge, and 3 standard coaches. Unfortunately, since this is an Amtrak long-distance train, it only does 1 round trip, meaning you would have no more than 2 mainline services. You may have a couple more if you have some services coming in and out of Amtrak's depot, but this would most likely not be practical enough for a DLC. This would be better off as a layer from another route that could have a P42 on it. Moving on, unlike the Los Angeles corridor, the Northern Line sees Union Pacific trains. Trains will be traveling along the entirety of the route. A major hurdle with Union Pacific, however, is the lack of yards on this section of the route. Although UP does own an intermodal facility in Los Angeles, UP does not send intermodals onto this line. Most freight trains on this route are auto rack and manifest trains. However, there are 2 yards along the route that could be used for shunting and local traffic. In Van Nuys, there is a small yard that is used by Union Pacific for shunting and local trains that serve the Van Nuys area. Similarly, there is another small yard just outside of Oxnard that serves similar purposes as the yard in Van Nuys. The yard is also used by the Ventura County Railroad, a local freight operator that serves Oxnard and Ventura County. If Union Pacific was to be added to this route, it would make the most sense to add the local trains as part of the base route. The primary locomotives used for local traffic on this route are the EMD GP60, GP40P-2, GP40-2, and the GP38-3. Adding local trains to this route could add about 10 to 20 services depending on what they are used for in service mode. Mainline freight would most likely be a layer. DTG could definitely get away with layering the SD70 ACE from Sherman Hill onto this route. However, they are not as common anymore due to the Tier 4 version of the SD70. GEVOs are also occasionally seen on this route, but the best option for mainline freight would be the EMD SD70M. This is what is most commonly seen on this route, making it the best option. DTG could definitely add the SD70M to Sherman Hill or another UP route and layer it onto the Northern Line. As mentioned before, this would most likely be a better option as a layer. This route does not see a lot of freight traffic. Similar to the San Diego area, you may see 1 to 2 freight trains during the day and a few at night. I see no more than 5 mainline freight services on this route. Due to the lack of major yards on this route, starting and endpoints would also be a challenge for this route. Most likely, freight trains will have to start and end on sidings within Los Angeles and San Luis Obispo. Although just like the Los Angeles corridor with its lack of freight traffic, it would still be nice to see Union Pacific on some other routes. Moving on to Metrolink, just like before, it would require no different rolling stock. Metrolink trains will be running between LA Union Station and East Ventura on the Ventura County line. This section of the route is approximately 70 miles long and stops at a total of 12 stations. The line sees 7 trains in 2021. 2 trains travel to East Ventura, 4 travel to Moore Park, and 1 travels to Chatsworth. Another line that runs on this line is the Metrolink Antelope Valley line. The line travels between Los Angeles and Lancaster, traveling about 70 miles and stops at a total of 12 stations. Antelope Valley trains run between Los Angeles and Burbank Downtown Station, calling it all stops. The line modern day sees 8 round trips. Although this section of the line is only 11 miles and only stops 3 times, this would definitely be nice as it would add some additional train traffic in the LA area. Adding up all these Metrolink services would add up to about 30 mainline services. As mentioned before, Metrolink would get more services if their main depot is interactable. Metrolink would also have additional services around Moore Park and East Ventura. At Moore Park, there are some sidings just outside of the station to allow for Metrolink trains to be pulled off of the main line for use later on in the day. This would add a few additional services to Metrolink since most freight trains terminate at Moore Park. East Ventura is a very complicated station. It does not have a direct connection with the main line. Trains will have to pull off the main line onto a track branching off to the right, going underneath State Route 101. Drivers then change sides to pull into East Ventura. Trains then have to reverse out of the station and pull into a siding parallel with the station for storage. When starting in the depot, trains back out, change directions, pull into East Ventura, load passengers, change sides, pull out of the station, then change sides yet again to head back onto the main line. Yeah, very complicated. However, this would bring some fairly unique gameplay within this area, even though only 2 trains serve this part of the line. This would also add some additional services to Metrolink. In total, there would be about 38 mainline passenger services on this route, excluding deadheads and depot moves. Adding depot moves into the route could bump up the service count to about 50 to 60 playable passenger services. In terms of time periods for this route, I think the best option would be to do 2019. Both Amtrak and Metrolink trains had more train traffic during this time. Amtrak had 1 additional train running towards Goleta. Metrolink would see a lot more traffic during this time. 1 additional train would terminate at East Ventura, and 2 additional trains would terminate at Chatsworth. Now, the bulk of increased services would come from additional airport shuttle services between Los Angeles and Burbank Airport South. This section of the line is approximately 14 miles and stops at only 4 stations, these being Los Angeles, Glendale, Burbank Downtown, and Burbank Airport South. These are marked in the 900 series for these services. Metrolink has 7 outbound trains and 6 inbound trains performing these shuttle services. This would add an additional 13 services to the timetable. Adding up all of these additional services, there would be a total of 57 mainline passenger services and most likely 65 to 75 playable passenger services overall. In terms of classic timetable periods, DTG could do a 2015 or 2009 timetable to include the older locomotive fleet used by Amtrak and Metrolink. However, a 2009 timetable may have less traffic on it. The only other time period DTG would be able to do would be the late 1980s. However, this would have no practicality at all since there was only one round trip serving this line by the San Diegan. So 2015 would most likely be the best timetable to add if the route was to ever get a classic timetable pack. Now let's talk about the practicality of this route being added to the game. Since the route is 188 miles, this would most likely never happen, and the farther away you go from LA, the less train traffic there is. I have come up with 3 different options for route shortages. I will be talking about the 2019 timetable for the sake of these route shortages. The first option is to do LA to Goleta. This section of the line is approximately 100 miles. This is obviously still not practical, but I think it is the best option. This would include the entire Ventura County line along with getting lovely coastal views between Oxnard and Goleta. As mentioned before, 3 trains terminate at Goleta modern day. This would make a lot of sense as only 2 additional Surfliner trains continue down to San Luis Obispo. The Coast Starlight would have to end in Santa Barbara as they do not stop at Goleta. This would give off a mix of busy passenger traffic in LA to lovely scenic views between Oxnard and Goleta. The next and shortest option is Oxnard to Goleta, which is 47 miles. This would make the route mostly focused on scenery since only Amtrak and Union Pacific trains go farther than Oxnard. Amtrak trains will be stopping at Oxnard, Ventura, Carpinteria, Santa Barbara, and Goleta. However, this completely eliminates Metrolink from the route. This would severely hinder the service count of this route. There would be only 12 mainline passenger services. The only depot moves Amtrak trains would do on this route is at Goleta for trains pulling into the depot. This would only add 6 services, meaning there would be no more than 18 playable passenger services for this section of the route. Adding freight to this route would probably add no more than 15 to 20 services, totaling up to about 35 to 45 total services on this route. This would be a route that only focuses on scenery. Moving on to my final option, and personally my least favorite option, is LA to East Ventura. This would have a similar service count to LA to Goleta, but would eliminate the 2 depot services at Goleta. What makes me not like this option, however, is that there would be no coastal views. This would give the route much less character since the Surfliner is well known for its views of the coastline. This route would be a poor representation of the Surfliner as it would only be traveling through the outskirts of LA and Simi Valley. This is why I think Los Angeles to Goleta is the best option. Now in terms of licensing, Metrolink owns everything between LA to Moorpark. Union Pacific owns everything else from Moorpark to San Luis Obispo. Overall, I just do not see this route getting added to the game. However, it definitely has quite a few qualities over the Los Angeles corridor with its much better scenery. I have lived along this line ever since I was young, so I would be all in for seeing this come to the game in the near future. The Pacific Surfline would bring many new and unique things to TSW. From its lovely scenery to its wide diversity in train traffic, the Pacific Surfliner would make for an amazing addition to TSW. If I was to pick which of these 2 routes I would want to see the most, I would have to go with the Los Angeles corridor. This route has something for almost every rail fan, from fast Amtrak intercity passenger trains, to stopping commuter trains done by Coaster and Metrolink, to shunting, local, and mainline freight done by BNSF, to a route with interesting and unique gameplay, to a route with phenomenal scenery. There is something for everybody to enjoy on this route. I am proud to say that the Pacific Surfliner is my local train, and I would love to see one of these routes come to the game in the near future. Thank you for watching, guys. This video was truly a passion project for me. I spent so much time working on the script for this video and spent lots of time editing this. For those who made it to the end of the video, you deserve a cookie. I was most definitely not expecting this video to be more than an hour. It truly shows what passion can do to someone. I will return to making route suggestion videos yet again. If you go down into the description, there will be a link taking you to a straw poll where you can vote on route suggestion ideas. Whatever 5 routes get the most votes will then be put in a community poll on YouTube, where you guys get to vote on the next route suggestion video that I do. If you have your own suggestion for routes I should add to the straw poll, consider posting your ideas down in the comments. Before I end the video, I just want to say thank you all so much for 700 subscribers. We have reached this milestone only a few days ago as of me recording this video. We are getting closer and closer to 1,000 subs. I am thankful for all of your guys' love and support. I don't know where I would be on YouTube without you guys. I just want to say thank you all for watching this video. This is Crazy Dash, peace out.